The Rest is Politics is powered by our friends at Fuse Energy.
And Fuse is a green electricity supplier, which means they generate all their energy from renewables. And they're actually offering a new bundle for anyone who switches to Fuse. And included in this, you'll be pleased to hear, is some merch. Alistair's hoodie, baseball caps, mugs, the Rest is Politics merch you may have seen on tour.
And all you've got to do to get it is go to getfuse.com/politics and use the referral code politics. And so the merch is great, but more important is actually that if you do switch to Fuse, you're going to find you get your energy cheaper than with all the other big companies.
And they invest 100% of their profits back into renewables. They also now offer 24/7 support, which you can access through the Fuse app.
So dead easy, getfuse.com/politics, referral code politics, find out how to get your merch, how to switch to Fuse, and how to save yourself money.
Welcome to the Rest is Politics Question Time with me, Rory Stewart.
And me, Alastair Campbell. And your voice still sounds a bit ropey, Rory, so I'll kick off with the first question. Now, Rory, I think we have to raise a member of the royal family this week.
Oh, yes.
I know you don't like talking about the royals too much. Emily, Prince Andrew, what has led to him finding himself in the mire again? How should the king now deal with him? I don't know anything about these things, but I read that the king has said that Prince Andrew should not join the family at Sandringham at Christmas. What's led to him finding himself in the mire again, Emily? Is this relationship with H6? A court order decided that we shouldn't know the name of H6, though that we now do, but somebody widely thought, although he denies it, to be working for Chinese intelligence services who got very, 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 very close to Prince Andrew. So yeah, he is in the mire again, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. And the Times, to be fair, quoted an American analyst who said, listen, you guys, as usual, are so obsessed with the royal family. What you're missing is the big picture, which is there's not just an H6, there's an H60, there's an X600. And the real question is not who's got close to Prince Andrew. The question is who's got close to the people that really matter in British political decision making. And that's what we're underestimating. And the story basically is that the Chinese state uses a massive range of people, including private Chinese business people, to create these links. They do it through university funding. There's been a very, very good, actually, reports from parliamentary committees on this. They do it through university funding. In this case, the guy was funding a branch of Gordonston, the Scottish boarding school internationally. They run friendship associations. They meet, in this case. He appeared in photographs with David Cameron and Theresa May. And they're doing all they can, I think, to try to ensure that China has good relations with Europe. And the reason why that matters, if we step away from Prince Andrew to the kind of bigger picture, is the number one demand of Trump is going to be that Europe lines up with him in a new Cold War with China. And the problem we will face, and the whole of Europe faces, is that our economy is in trouble. 50% of the profits of European automobile manufacturers and luxury goods manufacturers are made in China. Keir Starmer's betting a great deal on China. He's going to do a visit to China next year, the first British Prime Minister to visit China in a very long time. And it's going to be very, very difficult for European countries to emerge from their current doldrums. Partly actually going to be difficult to meet our targets on electric vehicles if we're not prepared to import Chinese electric vehicles, which are very, very cheap and very good.
It's probably impossible to know the accurate number, but if you sort of look around all the various sort of think tanks and defense specialists and intelligence websites and the rest of it, you're talking about upwards of 600,000 people who work for Chinese intelligence. Now, you'd be very surprised if some of them weren't in Britain. And if you're a kind of intelligence sort of minded sort of person, in Britain, I think getting sort of close to the royal family would be quite a sort of fun task, fun challenge.
It's also interesting that the Chinese government is very, very odd because they also have very weird ideas about who matters. So Prince Andrew, you will see in the newspapers, is photographed having a full formal meeting with Xi Jinping. It's very, very difficult to get a full formal meeting. I think it's in the Great Hall of the People with the president of China. The other person who could always get meetings with him before he died was Jacob Rothschild, because the Chinese government had read these crazy conspiracy theories which had convinced them that this Jewish banking family, the Rothschilds, ran the world. So whenever Jacob Rothschild turned up, he could have a meeting with Xi Jinping.
These days it's Elon Musk.
But no British Prime Minister, I think, managed to meet Xi Jinping from Theresa May onwards. I don't think that Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss in that brief period. So I think there's also another really interesting thing, which is part of them is really brilliant and really understand our societies. And another part of them is like, yes, it's all about the royal family and the Rothschilds, as though they're stuck in the beginning of the 19th century.
Mary Kalu, do you think Putin will welcome Assad with open arms, or will he be sidelined as he's perhaps no longer of any use to Putin? Don't really know about that.
My guess is that he will, that Russia is still an old-fashioned big power player that needs to demonstrate that it can be loyal to its allies even when they're thrown out. And that when it's dealing, remember, there have been coups in Mali, Niger, Chad, Guinea, Gabon, and in every case, basically French and American troops have been out and Russian Wagner mercenaries have come in. And with those kind of leaders, as with Assad, part of the deal with Russia is demonstrating that they're going to be loyal to these people when they're booted out. And we're much worse at this. If we look at Ashraf Ghani, who was the president in Afghanistan, who, we welcomed with open arms to Britain. I went to see him as a minister. We praised. As soon as he was kicked out of Afghanistan, basically nobody's been prepared to give him a visa. He can't get to the UK, can't get to the US. He's currently, last time I heard, sitting in the UAE. So I think the Russians, unlike the rest of us, don't really care about what the reputation of these people is and feel that it's more important to demonstrate to other despots around the world that they'll have a home if something goes wrong.
I had a long exchange last night with our mutual friend Tom Fletcher, who was a former ambassador. He was a foreign policy advisor to Labour and Tory in the past, and has now taken on this big job with the United Nations on humanitarian.
Which was Martin Griffiths' job, who we often talked about getting on, and a job that I've often fantasized about having. I'm very jealous of him.
Well, Tom has now got it. And he yesterday met the man of the moment, Al-Ghalani, who is the guy who led the rebels and who is now, effectively, with this sort of collection of people, would appear to be running Syria. And so it was interesting to get his take on him. He doesn't speak that much English. I think it was all done in Arabic. But, obviously from Tom's point of view, they were trying to get absolute commitment to protection of civilians, humanitarian workers in particular, and got that sort of agreement. He said that Al-Ghalani gave him a masterclass in the mess we inherited style communications, basically saying they were going to have to do quite a lot of difficult things to get the country back on his feet. But said that he found him impressive, very quiet. He said what he called a quiet charisma, very shrewd, as we've said before, very softly spoken. Said he was pretty exhausted, but at the same time, he had a sense that he was one of those people who's always thinking a few steps ahead. So we shall see. We shall see. And, you said, we said last week that we imagined that even while this is a prescribed terrorist organization, we imagined that the Brits and the Americans and others and the French will be all over it. And they are, as we're seeing. The British government civil servant met with him. He's now called Al-Shara rather than Al-Ghalani, met with him yesterday. But I think Tom Fletcher's, I'm really pleased he's got that job. I think he'll
do it very well.
Really good
it's a great appointment. A great appointment. And he was running an Oxford college, so it's a great to see him back in the swing of things. And he was, of course, the British ambassador in Lebanon, so he knows the region very well. The problem, I think, for Al-Ghalani is going to be what happens when things start kicking off inside Syria, and how does he deal with it? So if you think about the Taliban, they took power quite easily, like him, when we left. And the first problems began when there started being civilian demonstrations against the regime. And how do you deal with that? So you've got people now with face paint and some of these sort of slogans from the Arab Spring out in the streets of Damascus, calling for democracy. And him saying, I don't think we're anywhere close ready for elections. He's an Islamist, even if he is talking a very moderate game. And he will have to work out how he reconciles the views of his more extreme fighters who have been fighting tooth and nail and losing lives since 2011, partly for a vision of a gender apartheid world. I mean, remember, some of these people are genuinely, absolutely committed to very, very conservative visions on women's place in society, very conservative visions of homosexuality, etc. Because this ISIS, Daesh, is a brother offshoot from his movement. He knew Baghdadi. He was sent out to be the emir in Syria and broke with them, but they come from a very similar place, rooted in Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
So what does he do if the hardliners in his organization say, well, wait a second, we've been dying and fighting to get rid of this irreligious secular government, and now you've got, I don't know, men kissing in the street, women in miniskirts, whatever it is. What do you do if there are large disruptive demonstrations calling you a despot? How harsh do you crack down? What do you do with criminality? What do you do with gangs? So there are a lot of armed people, huge number of armed people, and they're not all his. Big armed Arab tribal gangs from the south. There's a Turkish-backed armed groups. There are Kurdish armed groups coming in from the east. So I think the first big problem he's going to be is how does he restore order and security without generating all the predictable headlines of him being a despot clamping down on human rights?
Well, part of the answer to that, as well as the practicalities, is that he will need political support and political cover from some of these people that are sitting down talking to him now. So I guess these first impressions that he makes upon people are pretty important. The issue in relation to Israel that we've got the most questions about this week, Rory. I mean, Israel, which is continuing to bomb sites in Syria where they think that weapons programs might fall into the wrong hands, but actually was their decision to close the Israeli embassy in Dublin. Claire Gunning, I greatly appreciate your views on Israel's decision. Shashi Rami, please can you discuss Israel's decision to close its embassy and the Israeli foreign minister calling the Irish prime minister an anti-Semite. What was your take on that?
Well, I mean, fascinating. I mean, really fascinating. So I mean, this is seems to be from a distance, but maybe I'm getting this wrong, on a par with Israel's general policy of declaring the Secretary General of the United Nations persona non grata, rejecting the authority of the International Criminal Courts, and now closing its embassies in Dublin because of what it says is anti-Semitism. And in particular, I think they're enraged with Ireland's enthusiastic support for the International Criminal Court.
And also the recognition of Palestine.
But a very, very big step to actually close an embassy with a mature European democracy. I can't really think of a precedent, but you've reminded us that there is history there, isn't there? I mean, Ireland has tended to have quite a pro-Palestinian history. The president of Ireland appeared with a keffiyeh around his neck. You reminded us, didn't you? Yeah.
Look, there's no doubt at all. You can see this in the public statements of successive Irish Taoiseachs that they are, broadly pro-Palestinian.
Yeah.
I think it is harsh to take that and say, as a result of that, to have one foreign minister called the elected prime minister of another an anti-Semite. And I think what this is part of is basically saying that if you criticize what we do as a government, that because you're criticizing the Israeli government at a time that it's been under attack post the October 7th attacks on them, that somehow that's anti-Semitic. And I've yet to see any evidence that Simon Harris is anti-Semitic. And I've yet to see them present any evidence that he's said or done anything that you could define as anti-Semitic, as opposed to being an elected leader of a country which has a policy position, has a stance, takes a stand, and is basically saying, and it's, Bill Clinton made the point, and so did Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel said in terms, Bibi Netanyahu and the current government is not Israel. You can be supportive of a country. That doesn't mean that you can't from time to time criticize that government's handling of really difficult events. And that, it seems to me, is all that Ireland has done. So we've got a very tough, outspoken Israeli ambassador here in London. The lady is a woman ambassador also in Dublin, Dana Ehrlich. She's now presumably going back to Israel or to a different job somewhere else. But I think it felt like a pretty impetuous and not very sensible thing to do, because that really is shutting down your embassy is a pretty big thing to do in any foreign relations. I mean, we've got an embassy in Moscow. We've got an embassy. We've got an embassy in lots of different countries where we are not necessarily on the same wavelength. I think to equate to do this is basically to say that Ireland is an enemy state of Israel. I think that's a very, very bad thing to say or do.
It is very interesting, isn't it? Because the Arab League traditionally in other Muslim states like Mali, Niger, Mauritania, I think don't have diplomatic relations with Israel. I mean, Saudi is still doesn't recognize Israel. It's not just Iran that doesn't recognize Israel, but it's interesting decision. I mean, I would have thought a foolish decision, because to isolate yourself from a European Union democratic member state seems to be a much bigger step than people are understanding, and I can't see what Israel gains from doing it.
So, Rory, as you know, we are sponsored by Fuse on the topic of energy. I saw you tweeted recently about how energy costs in the UK are 2 times what they are elsewhere in Europe, and businesses suffering because of that. So is that right? 2 times?
Yeah, I mean, there are different figures on this, but The Guardian ran an article. They were particularly focused on small businesses and gave a lot of examples of people where the costs were twice as high as they'd been. It's partly because with households, governments are quite careful to put an energy cap in place, which doesn't apply to small businesses. So typically the bills have gone up £5,000. So here was a little guy who was running Dreadnought tiles in the West Midlands. I don't want to minimize it. It's a very good example of the problems. So obviously, in order to make roof tiles and bricks, you need high temperatures, which requires energy. And he reckons that his energy bills more than doubled, had to cut production, raise prices. Don't think we'll see energy costs return. So the reason this is important is that one of the many reasons driving deindustrialization, so not decarbonization, but literally businesses, industrial businesses closing in the UK, is the cost of energy that they're facing.
Do you mind if I raise a what you call a reader's concern about
yes.
some of your previous comments on energy, Rory? So somebody I know, who you may also know, called Emma Pinchbeck,
yes,
who runs the Climate Change Committee. She's the chief executive of the Climate Change Committee, which is the statutory advisory body that helps government work out how to meet the legal climate change targets internationally.
So quite a big deal, and she knows much more what she's talking about than me.
Or me. She listens to the podcast. She says, please take this in good faith, but I sometimes get concerned that the podcast, and Rory in particular, she says, can be a bit careless on energy transition or net zero. And I think her point is that you tend to put rising energy costs all onto the cost of transition, and that may not be the case.
Yeah, so this came out of there's been a very interesting guy called Ed Conway who's done some really great stuff. I've written a good book called The Material World that I'm plugging. But he's got an amazing graph that he's just put out with what's happened to the chemical industry in Britain. So if you look at what's happened since 2021, the total economy and services is up. Manufacturing is about 10% down, but chemicals, 37% smaller in just 3 years. And chemicals are very, very, take a lot of energy.
So are you saying that those sectors are down by that number, or that they're
Yeah, exactly. The phrase is the chemical sector has contracted by more than a third over the past 3 years, one of the mainstays of the British economy.
What's that about?
There are a number of reasons for that, and that's why I think it's good to be called up. Some of that is to do with wholesale prices. Some of that is to do with the way that we price things and the way that we tax energy. And actually, it would be great maybe to get her on.
Yeah.
Because as you say, she's a huge expert, and maybe we can get into that in more detail. But there is a big problem. And that's why Jonathan Reynolds, the Labour business secretary, has said we're talking about decarbonization, not deindustrialization. People interested in, one part of this argument can listen to the interview we did with Dieter Helm, where Dieter Helm basically explains how Britain and Europe have largely offshored their industrial production to China. Patted ourselves on the back because we're emitting less carbon, but then we're still consuming even more. We just manufacture it in China and importing it back. Much as we drive sheep off the Cumbrian fell sites, pat ourselves on the back for not doing any damage to our grass and our fell sites. And then we just import it from New Zealand and allow the sheep damage New Zealand instead.
So with the knowledge that UK energy costs twice that of other countries, why not close the gap, switch to Fuse, who offer cheaper tariffs than all other major providers? So download the app today, use the referral code POLITICS after signing up for your chance to win a trip merch bundle. How exciting is that? Visit getfuse.com/politics for terms and conditions and to learn more. Right, your turn for a question.
So here's a question I thought was rather good. Clavs Maris Mitzis, can you talk about the success stories from the Eastern Bloc? You've mentioned the Baltics and Romania before. What did they manage to do that Ukraine and Georgia perhaps didn't? So the story here is, of course, that Romania and Eastern Europe in 1989, their communist governments collapsed. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, parts of the Soviet Union, like Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, came free. And they joined the European Union in this incredible moment in 2004. And it's a sort of miracle story. These countries, let's take Lithuania and Romania, their GDPs per capita, in other words, how rich the average person was compared to the UK in 1989, they were about a third as rich. In other words, the average person in Britain was 3 times wealthier. These were very poor countries, about $7,000 a year, and they were autocracies. The European Union came in, and the European Union provided pre-accession funding, but most importantly of all, huge enlargement investment in reform, sorting out their markets, sorting out their constitution, sorting out their governance to prepare them for European membership. Fast forward to the end of the story, the average person in Lithuania 30 years later, is now richer than the average person in Britain. So they've gone from being 3 times poorer to being richer than us. And this is why I think we're massively underestimating the power of Europe. They can do stuff that America can't do. America and Iraq and Afghanistan couldn't offer equal membership of a union, couldn't offer a single market, couldn't offer all the stuff, that carrot that Europe can offer, which has completely transformed all these countries around the world.
I think that was another reason why, sorry, you take me back to June the 23rd, 2016 again, Rory. I don't think we did enough to explain to British people that the success that was created, as you say, by European Union support for the countries that came in actually was of benefit to all of us. I don't think we ever kind of managed to make that link, and it was a mistake.
And that Britain was the central driver for EU enlargement.
Yeah.
You know, you and Tony Blair were really proud of it. And it was an amazing achievement. It was one of the greatest achievements. And Britain didn't take credit for it then and should have done. Why is it you didn't take credit for it? Why are you not shouting it from the rooftops?
I think it goes into that space of, Europe as something that we kind of wanted to do. But back to the point of the debate we're having on the main podcast about Labour's current approach on immigration is that certain things you want to do them without necessarily shouting about them because you want people to focus on the things that you're constantly being told they care about: economy, jobs, health, housing, education, etc. But it's part of the same thing that when you're going around different parts of the European Union, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, wherever, and you're constantly seeing the European flag on signposts and buildings explaining that the European Union, the European Commission was part of the building of this road, the building of that school, the building of this and the other. You see a little bit of that in the UK. You saw a little bit of that. But we're always embarrassed to say this was done with help of the European Union, European Commission, which I agree, I think it was a mistake.
It's so weird, isn't it? It's really weird because, in fact, it is the big international success story of the 21st century. It weirdly more than the interventions we boasted of in the Balkans. This was the thing that really did bring democracy and did bring economic growth. 2004, Czechia, Estonia, Cyprus, Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, Malta, Poland, Slovenia, Slovakia. Poland is an unbelievable success. I mean, it's on its way to being the defense and security superpower of Europe. And that would have been unimaginable, I guess, when you were growing up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, let's not get too depressed. Now, here's a great question, Rory. David Giffin. How sad that we live in times when Time magazine considers Donald Trump to be Person of the Year. What does this say about the world we live in and how to influence it? What it says is that Donald Trump won. And like a lot of these businesses and media organizations, I mean, Trump said himself when he opened the New York Stock Exchange the other day, look at all these people, they hated me a year ago, now they all want to be my friend. But I agree, I think it's a pretty lame choice. I was very proud of the New Europeans' choice of Person of the Year, Rory.
Oh, yes. Who do they choose?
Gisèle Pelicot, the lady in France who waived her anonymity so that she could reveal to the world this horrific rapes to which she'd been subjected. So she was our Person of the Year. I thought that was a far better choice of person. Who's your Person of the Year, Rory?
The King. The King is my Person of the Year.
Every year. Is that every year? Did it used to be the Queen?
No, I'm going to make the case for the King. I think people were very anxious about what would happen when he would take over. The Queen was had been in for a very long time and was very, very popular. People were very nervous, and I think he's risen to it incredibly. I think he's doing things which haven't been done before. He's obviously really enjoying the job. He's had a horrible cancer diagnosis and chemotherapy, comes through it really strongly. And, I think people underestimate how important it is and how proud we should be of him.
Good. Okay. Case well made. Case well made.
Thank you.
I'm Giselle Pellicot. You're the king, and Time Magazine is Donald J. Trump.
Question for you, Lucas Birkbeck. After seeing the success of Trump in the American election, could you see a British party putting forward a celebrity candidate? If so, do any candidates come to mind? Look, this isn't a stupid point because, of course, what was Boris Johnson really? He was above all a celebrity. He was the most famous person, certainly when I was in Parliament, because of his time on TV. He was the one guy who everybody knew his name, and it does seem to really matter. That's presumably why Matt Hancock tried to go on Celebrity Jungle. What do you make of this question of celebrity in politics, or are you still trying to resist it and think it doesn't matter?
Well, I probably am, but you probably am pushing a sort of boulder up a hill. Could I imagine it here? I mean, I'd argue that Nigel Farage is in the Boris Johnson mould.
He's a celebrity, isn't he?
He's effectively a celebrity, yeah.
I sent you, just to annoy you, round the corner from me, the local postcard shop. You can buy a birthday card for your beloved with a picture of Nigel Farage on the front of it.
I think I might give that one a miss.
Yeah, but it's a sign, isn't it?
Yeah.
That the guy's becoming a sort of weird icon.
Well, he's definitely, he's always had a following of sorts, but I think he's, how I define as a celebrity is that in this, being a celebrity is not just being very, very famous. It's also that you get treated slightly differently to how other people in your walk of life would do. So, for example, in football, David Beckham was a very good footballer, but he was also a celebrity.
Yes.
He was something above football. And so I guess who Lucas would be thinking about in terms of the UK context, I guess would be a Jeremy Clarkson. But, I think Jeremy Clarkson, when he appeared on that farmers' protest, he didn't stand up to a moderately tough interview very well.
Or our employer and boss for the centre left,
Gary Lineker.
Yes.
Would Gary, I mean, I can't see Gary going the whole hog.
No. But he'd have that name recognition, wouldn't he? He'd have that appeal.
Oh, 100%. And also he's got a good brain.
Yeah.
Which, as a good brain in politics is required more than people think.
But one of the things you also require, I'm continually reminded of looking at Netanyahu and looking at Farage, is unbelievable never say die resilience. I mean, whatever you think of them, and I profoundly disagree with them, what's astonishing is they just never give up. I mean, Farage famously failed to be elected 7 times. He's entered the House of Commons on his 8th attempt. I mean, how many people would keep going 7 times?
Also, he's always had a platform, not least because the media finds him interesting. He's always had that platform, but there's no doubt in my mind that getting into Parliament has added to his ability to use the platform that he already had. No, you've got to say that just keeping going is one of the most underrated strengths in any walk of life, but certainly in politics.
Exactly, because all these people have had any number of times when people have written them off and said it's finished, it's over. They're never coming back from that. That was so embarrassing. That was so awful.
Yeah.
And somehow endurance, longevity is just a secret skill in politics.
Now here's one for you, Rory. Muse Ahmed. Trump said he will recognise Somaliland. I didn't know he had. Has he said that? What are your thoughts?
Well, here we are. Firstly, I need to apologise to many of my friends who are linked to Somaliland who felt that I was extremely disobliging in a question from Raggy Omar. So Raggy Omar pointed the fact that there'd been a very successful, clean election in Somaliland and a transfer of power. And I made a series of pompous comments about the fact that the UK government doesn't recognise Somaliland, and I talked about proxy wars in Somalia. And so I've been called up on this, people saying, when will you recognise that Somaliland has been an extraordinary, and it is extraordinary. I mean, Somalia has been in the most miserable situation of drought, starvation, civil war and chaos. And Somaliland, which I visited, has been peaceful. It's had democratic elections. It has a very different political history. It had a relation to Britain when other places had a relation to Italy. And of course, it is possible that one day it could be independent. But of course, there's so many drivers in the world which leaders to resist countries becoming independent. But I guess Czechia and Slovakia split apart, the Balkans split apart, the Soviet Union collapsed. So, maybe I'm being too foreign officey and stuck in the mud about Somaliland.
If I can take you back to your old job, Rory. So, Minister, are you saying you recognise them or you don't?
Well, that's why you've taught me this wonderful technique from Trump where I just talk to you about how difficult it is. Look, here's a serious Alastair question. Cavan Connell wanted to ask if you've been keeping up to date with Sarah Wagenknecht's breakthrough in the recent German elections with a message of cultural conservatism and left-wing economics. Is there something to this? So tell us a little bit about Sarah Wagenknecht. You have told us about her in the past, but she's a big figure. She's a name. She's managed to do something very unusual, which is break away from a party without losing herself.
Yeah, but it's interesting how I've got the feeling that she's not quite. The rise is sort of feels like it's stalling a little bit. Look, there's no doubt she has been a big player. She's shaken up politics.
Remind people who she is.
Well, she's a left-wing politician. She broke away to form her own party. So it is a party in her name. And she's, I haven't got the latest polls in front of me, but she's done okay. She's done pretty well in recent elections. And she's what I call it. She's a left-wing populist, is what she is. And the questioner is right. There's this sense of sort of a little bit of social conservatism, economically pretty left-wing.
She's not quite Jeremy Corbyn, is she? So just to explain to listeners, she sounds like Corbyn because she talks openly about socialism and critiques free market economics, and she's sympathetic to Russia and Ukraine, but she's also not interested in kind of woke stuff. And she's very, very anti-immigration. So that I guess is the cultural conservative stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, but she's also somebody who I think over her life, I suspect her economic views have shifted a fair bit. She's always adopted sort of pretty populist positions on immigration, refugees. She's been in Parliament for, I think she was elected sort of around about 2010, 2009.
So she's relatively new. She's not like Corbyn. She's not an old veteran.
No, she's not. She's not been there for decades. But 2009 is quite a, that's a reasonable old stint.
Not compared to old Farage and Geert Wilders. No.
No, at all. Not compared to Corbyn. She was part of Die Linke, which is the party to the left of the Social Democrats, and she broke away to form this Bündnis, her own party, and she's doing okay. She's doing okay. She's not going for the chancellor election, but her party will be a player in German politics for some time to come.
And is it important? I mean, I don't know whether it is or not, but I of course, as a British person, I noticed that her father was Iranian, and she's anti-immigration, which reminds me a little bit of the strange phenomenon of. Well, not strange, maybe it's understandable, but Priti Patel and Suella Braverman.
Yeah.
Is that something that's noted in Germany particularly or not? Or is she known particularly for her Iranian heritage? Is that something that...
No, I don't think so.
No, people don't emphasize that much. No.
I'll tell you, where I think she'll come under attack is over her... There is a sort of, as with Le Pen, there's a sort of, constant echoing of Putin talking points, which,
right.
I think ought to land her in more difficult than it does. She's been pretty outspoken on Gaza. She called Gaza an open-air prison.
Right.
And obviously, within German politics, you will find the sort of the defense, the right of Israel to exist is constantly being defended, and she does that. But she's now got a very large but, which basically says, but what they're doing now is completely unacceptable. So that has sort of set her apart in some way. So she's an interesting person. I wouldn't put her in the same category of some of the other populist leaders. I think there's more to her. But it's interesting the question as though there'd been some sort of huge recent success. I'm not aware of that.
Very good. Well, final thing, and I think we should wrap up, is we've had an invitation to talk about our favorite books at the moment. So here's a couple of sort of serious things from me and maybe a more jolly one.
Mm-hmm.
Great book, if you want serious economics, by an economist called J. Bradford DeLong, called Slouching Towards Utopia, which is kind of one of these wonderful kind of attempts to summarize the last sort of 100 years of economic history.
Yeah.
Adam Tooze, a couple of books, one of them called Crashed, How a Decade of Financial Crises Changed the World. But also he's written a very, very good book on Woodrow Wilson and the end of the First World War, and a jollier book, The Wide, Wide Sea by a guy called Hampton Sides, which is about the final adventure of Captain Cook.
Oh.
And then a little plug for Waiting for Godot.
Samuel Beckett?
Samuel Beckett, yeah.
To read it as a book?
No, it's on at the moment in the Theatre Royal Haymarket. And I was lucky enough to go and see it this week with Ben Whishaw, who's probably the most famous actor in it. But if you want to see, that bizarre, astonishing, surreal, absurd play by Samuel Beckett, first written in French, translated into English, in which you spend a lot of time waiting for Godot beside a tree, there has never been a better production of it.
Excellent. I've gone for Patriot, Navalny. I think it really is worth reading. And it's hard to put your finger on why I like it so much. I think it's the fact that he writes with such kind of optimism and almost like cheeriness. It's a really kind of extraordinary thing, especially, we all know how his life ended. And I just love the idea of a book written and published. I think it's only February that he was killed. So within a few months since his death, this book put together from stuff that he wrote in the past and notes that he was smuggling out of prison has been put together in the form of a book, which is now essentially part of a political campaign. So that's the one that I'm going for. And all the more fun stuff and the novel stuff I'd be talking to a very minority audience, because yet again this year, Rory, I've been reading far more German books than
you're very impressive
than English. But yeah, no, the Navalny book really, really is worth reading. And also, I am going to give a plug to Tom Baldwin's book on Keir Starmer. I still think that has been the best explanation of the character of Keir Starmer. And I think if people really want to know Keir Starmer, I think it's worth getting Tom's book.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Alistair. It's been a real pleasure, and look forward to speaking again soon.
See you soon. I hope your voice gets better.
Bye-bye.